Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's special program. Tonight is Shir 161. And Baruch Hashem, like I start off every week, thanking everybody who promotes it on their statuses and lets people know about it and emails it out to their friends, their neighbors, their son-in-laws, everybody to join and to really grow together. And again, tonight is Sichas Chaverim. We need to talk through important inyanim. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. Actually, Mr. Brafman was supposed to come on 2 weeks ago, and we pushed it off a little bit. But again, this is a very important topic. I was actually by Menachem, and a few guys were talking about something recently, something that's happening now, also again in our community. So these are things that are very, prevalent to us, and it's something definitely we want to cover. We never covered such a topic, so I'm very happy Mr. Brafman joined us tonight and gave us his precious time. We appreciate that. Again, if anybody wants to join WhatsApp statuses, you could WhatsApp me at 848-525-0066 and save my number. I'll send you the flyer every Sunday with the replays. You could also go to menachembernfeld.com and get all the emails, the replays, and everything that goes on in the Coach Menachem world. All the people that are watching us on YouTube, you can click on the like button and the subscribe button. And when Menachem uploads the videos every Monday morning, you can see the videos and you can watch them. And Mr. Brafman, most people watch it afterwards. They don't watch it live because the timing is late at night, but they can watch it afterwards. So I want to thank first also our advertising sponsors that promote us, the Lakewood Scoop here in Lakewood, Ellie and Ariel from 5 Town Central, and Chayla Kaufman from JCN, for always promoting us on all the Jewish digital platforms. Again, anybody's here the first time, every Sunday night on 9:30 on this Zoom ID. We're doing this almost 4 years. We have different rabbanim, different therapists. Now we could say we have different lawyers. We have, we bring on the best of the best, and please let everybody know to join us, to be part of it. Menachem, we're going to have a special program this Monday night because of scheduling with Rabbanis Friedman. He wasn't available really Sundays the next few weeks. And the topic is going to be, why did Hashem let this happen? Our role in time of crisis. And he wants to explore world events and the biblical prophecy of Gog and Magog. That's going to be tomorrow night. And then Menachem, the following Sunday is going to be Reb David Sutton, who wrote, is the author of the best-selling Beis Halevi in English. It's one of the best art scrolls for him. And we're going to be good. We're going to be doing a shir in the Beis Halevi together. And it's titled Mastering Tranquility, Insights from the Teaching of Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Rosh Hashiva Volozhin, and exploring B'tachon through the wisdom of the Beis Halevi's teachings. So please join us Menachem tomorrow night and next Sunday. We're all going to grow together. Tonight we have the schus and honor of having world-famous criminal attorney Ben Brafman with us. He's going to be help thousands of people, really give them insights, and to stay out of legal trouble and keep our minds open and really get a real clarity in this big topic that we're going into. So we're going to start off first with the Gematria, then Coach Menachem, then Ben Brafman will open up with a little bit. So tonight's shir is 161. My friend over here is Mr. Gematria, Rabbi Fried. He's going to give us the Gematria for 161, and then at the end of the shir, Ben Brafman is going to say if it's a good Gematria.
Sounds like a good idea. We're holding a Zoom share number 161, Education and Legal Insight for Protection Against Affinity Crimes and Ponzi Schemes. Very, very interesting and exciting. One must realize that Hashem rules the entire world, and He gives each and every person his parnasa that he deserves. There's no reason for people to make hasty decisions and to fall into schemes and to scams. Which leads us up to tonight's Gematria. The Gematria 161 is Hamanig Hagogel. The Hashem is our large leader.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start it off with Coach Menachem. Coach Menachem, we're here on a Sunday night. It's 9:44. Hundreds of people are here. Why are we here? What are we trying to gain? What are we doing here?
Yeah, welcome everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the program. Let's get real with Coach Menachem. Baruch Hashem, we're doing 161. And tonight is going to be an interesting one. And I want to welcome all the newcomers. If it's the first time, welcome every Sunday nights. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on. And we'll see how we can tie it in a little bit with tonight's topic. But, many people wonder, why is it so important? Why is it important now? The truth is, Klal Yisrael is going through, we need a lot of schusim. We need the Yeshuas. And many people can't even believe whether you do listen to the news, you don't listen, what's going on. We can't believe we're in a situation like this. We haven't been in such a situation for a long time. We hoped we would never be, and here we are. It's sometimes we can't believe it that it's actually happening, and we have to be mechazik ourselves. Baruch Hashem, we see what's going on in Klal Yisrael, the Achdus, and all the chesed that's going on, and the davening and the learning. There's a lot of schusim, Baruch Hashem. Everybody teach to their own, whatever works, to be mechazik yourself, whether it's Torah, tefillah, tshuva, chizik and emunah v'tachon. And like we heard, the Gematria, the chizik and emunah v'tachon is not only in one aspect. It's really the whole self. How you live with Hashem, how you believe that everything that happens is Hashem. And I believe that's why it brings us to tonight's topic. You know, when you go into business, you want to make a few dollars, you want to help Hashem, that He should be able to give you a few dollars, so you're going to come up with a good idea, and you want to invest, which everything is very good. But we have to remember it's a shtadlus, and we get sometimes confused between a shtadlus and betochen. So yes, we have to go to work, we have to do a shtadlus, we have to do what we need to do, but once it gets a little bit blurry, we have to turn to, believe Hashem runs the world. There's no reason why to get into these things. Now, there are many times that people are naive, they don't know. And I think tonight we'll talk a lot about just the awareness to understand, before you do anything, understand what you're doing. And a lot of people sent in questions, good questions, whether you're in business for a while or starting off, just want to make sure you're going down the right path. And hopefully we'll be able to cover tonight. So we're taking a few minutes off for what's going on in the world. Maybe this is a little bit, you can focus tonight on this, and Amidst Hashem, we should be able to take out from tonight's topic everything, whatever we need. So I do want to thank Ben Brafman for coming on, and from the Aleph Institute for making this happen. And Hashem should help. We should guide us. We should get to the right place. We should be able to live with Hashem and do the right ishtadlus. Shkoyach.
Okay, Shkoyach Coach Menachem for the opening. Okay, we're going to get into it now. So again, tonight's show is entitled, we titled it Empowering Communities, Education and Legal Insight for Protection Against Affinity Crimes and Ponzi Schemes Through Education and Legal Awareness. Tonight's show was brought about by the Aleph Institute. This is a part of their project called Project 432. It was launched by the Aleph Institute to inspire the next generation to conduct their everyday finances with moral clarity according to the Torah teaching in observance of the law. They offer an array of education for different ages, stages in life, from middle school curriculum to high school workshops, presentations, professional conferences, and a multi-platform awareness campaign, which is also led to partnering on this podcast. 432 alludes to the 432nd mitzvah, awe of Hashem. There's a constant mitzvah to express our awareness of Hashem's presence and our relevance for Him in our day-to-day activities, including, of course, how we behave financially. So now I'm going to turn over to Mr. Ben Brafman. Mr. Ben Brafman is a criminal defense attorney based in New York, and he's recognized as a national expert in white-collar defense and litigation. Former assistant district attorney, has been in private practice since 1980, representing a wide range of high-profile celebrities, business leaders, lawyers, medical professionals, and at the highest levels of the American legal system. Mr. Brafman, thank you. I appreciate it again for your time. And floor is yours. A lot of questions. We're going to get into it. Just open it up.
Thank you very much. And I start by saying I'm a big fan of Aleph. I think they do amazing work. And, I lived near the Lubavitcher Rebbe when I was growing up. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this 432 initiative. And I think given what's going on in the world right now, I think it would be inappropriate for me to just start talking about criminal defense issues without first, joining in the tefillos that are going on around the world for Eretz Yisrael and for the Chayalim in particular, and for all of the for the matzav that is unfortunately enveloping Eretz Yisrael. So I think we also need davening and tefillos on behalf of all of the people who are affected by this. So I want to, say in the first introduction, I don't think white-collar criminal law is something that is particular to the Frum community, to the Orthodox community. I think, unfortunately, given the world we live in, when something happens to someone who is Orthodox, and to the extent their case gets some publicity in the media, it makes it appear that the entire Orthodox community is involved in misdeeds or misconduct or criminal violation. And to the contrary, I think the overwhelming majority of the Orthodox community are legitimate people who are honest and who are ehrlich in everything that they do. However, there is, something to be said for having a Yiddish cup, having a Jewish head, which gives one the impression on occasion that you're smarter than the government, or you're smarter than the people who look to enforce these laws. And while we might be smarter for a couple of months or a couple of years even, at the end of the day, the government figures it out. So, my hope is that nobody will, who's listening to this broadcast, will need me professionally. I didn't agree to do this broadcast so that I could encourage more people to retain me. Thank God I have enough business right now, but to the extent that I can be helpful in hopefully keeping people from engaging in criminal conduct, maybe then it's worth staying up so late on a Sunday night. So I'm open to your questions, or I'll talk about what I have noticed or what I have learned over the years. But I think it's going to be more productive and more efficient if you start with the question that I know is on your mind.
Okay, let's do that. Menachem, should we say a kapitel Tehillim? First of all, I want to say for my brother. My brother this week is not feeling well, Avram Yontiv in peril, and also for the Chayalim and everybody. Menachem, you want to say kapitel Tehillim? There's quite a few hundred people here. We could say it together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shir hamalois mi mamakim krasicha adinoi adinoi shima b'koi li tienos necha kashuvois lekol trachminoi emavoy nois tishmol ya adinoi mi yamoid ki chvas licho leman tivoroi kvisi adinoi kivsu nafshi v'dbroi cholti nafshi ladinoi mishoimrim laboike shoimrim laboike Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, Kim Adonai Chesed, ve'harbe imoy fides, ve'yiftes Yisrael, mikol avoynoi sof.
Okay, we're going to start off first with a poll. We're going to get everybody's feeling, and then we're going to jump into some questions. Again, if anybody has questions, please text Asher Parnas. We're going to, again, live questions go first, and Mr. Brafman is open to anything and everything, so let's make it happen. We have a 4-poll question tonight to see where everybody's holding, okay? Everybody see the poll? Okay, here we go. Number 1, do you believe certain cultural or religious factors within the frum Jewish community contribute to susceptibility to affinity crimes and Ponzi schemes? So 3 options. Yes, cultural factors play a significant role. Option 1. Option 2, no, cultural factors have minimal influence. Or number 3, I'm not sure. That's the first question. Number 2, what specific personality traits or characteristics do you think make someone more inclined to engage in financial crimes or become a victim of them? Again, these are just your opinion. We're gonna go through it in a lot of questions. We just want to get the feeling from everybody. First question is overconfidence in investment decisions. They feel very confident when they do investments. Lack of financial literacy, or C, trusting nature. They're just that, simple trusting people that just, somebody comes to them with a deal, they do it. Third question. Have you ever had a close acquaintances, including yourself, who have personally been affected by an affinity crime or a Ponzi scheme that have lost money in investment? Yes, I have, or no, I haven't. Just a simple yes or no. And the last question is, what strategies do you recommend for achieving the right balance between financial trust and remaining vigilant against potential scams in your community? What's the strategy that you would advise? Number 1, promote financial education and awareness. Number 2, encourage the use of legal contracts. Number 3, foster a culture of transparency and accountability. For number 4, that was number 3. Number 4, encourage each investor to review and discuss with professionals and the potential investment. I can't even read the rest. Basically, the answer is to have the investor review whatever it is with, if he's investing in a real estate deal or he's investing in another deal, with the people that are professionals in that industry and with the right people, so they could really go through a deal and really give you their intelligent advice. So those are the 4 questions. Everybody answer how you see fit for yourself. We'll review it, and then we'll jump into questions. Again, if anybody has a live question, please text Asher Parnas, and let's hop around Mr. Brafman's valuable time over here.
Well, let me begin by, I see in the poll that a lot of people believe that.
By the way, nobody could see the answers yet. I share them after everybody. Only you could see it, but nobody else can see what everybody else's votes. So I'm going to give it 2 more seconds, and then we'll share it together. Okay?
Yep.
I rest my case. Okay, I cracked myself up. Sorry. Okay, let's share the poll with everybody. So let's go one by one. We'll do it together. Okay, Mr. Brafman?
Yes.
Okay, do you believe certain cultural or religious factors within different community contribute to the susceptibility of affinity crimes and Ponzi schemes? So 46% of people, most people think yes, that cultural factors play a significant role. 24% of people say no, and 30% of people are not sure. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's a fair analysis that cultural or religious factors sometimes make one more susceptible to, in jumping into a scheme that if it was a complete stranger, they would think twice and sometimes three times about. And I had a sentence about a year ago before a judge, and I don't particularly like her, and I don't think highly of her, but she sentenced an Orthodox a man, and she blamed it on affinity fraud. That's the word she used. And affinity fraud is, you see people in shul, you see them in a class, you begin to know them, they begin to know you, and maybe you're the last person they might suspect of becoming involved in fraudulent conduct. And as a result, people, even sophisticated people, sometimes let down their guard. So, I have one overview of this. Anyone who guarantees you a specific amount of interest every month, regardless of how the investment is doing, don't become involved, because there's no such thing in today's market as a sure thing. And to the extent that they tout their knowledge and their involvement and their sophistication, I think you need to check them out. And I think checking them out sometimes requires you to go outside the community, because people within the community have a way of insulating their true self from people outside the community, or from inside the community to other people inside the community. So I think jumping into an investment scheme quickly is generally not a good idea. And whether you are yourself sophisticated, or you simply made a lot of money because you inherited it, or you married, the right person, or you made a lot of money, but you don't really have any real sophistication in real estate or in investments of any kind. I think there are enough people who you can ask and get an unvarnished opinion from. And I think in most cases, if the investment is very risky, or it has the earmarks of, or red flags, if you will, of being fraudulent, I think the more you ask, the more you're going to see, and the more you'll be reluctant to become involved.
Okay. Let's go to the next poll. What specific personality traits or characteristics do you think someone more inclined to engage in financial crimes or become a victim? So it's pretty split, really straight down the middle. 32% overconfidence in investment decisions, 38% lack of financial literacy, and 30% trusting nature. From all your years' experience, what's your take on that question?
Tell you the truth, it's really hard to answer that question, because after, about 45 years of doing this kind of work, it still doesn't surprise me when I meet, the person who has engaged in that kind of fraud, or the people who have been, induced to enter into it and lost a tremendous amount of money. For the people who invest, sometimes it's naivete, meaning they really are trusting, or they're just so interested in making, a lot of money quickly. They let down their guard. So, a lot of that is, that's a common denominator. Many, many people who become involved and lose their money are, as a practical matter, a little bit too trusting. In terms of the people who pull off these schemes, one characteristic I've seen, that's uniform across the board. I guess it can best characterized in a yeshiva characterization of someone being a chutzpahdik, someone who doesn't dot his I's across their T's in anything that they do, someone who is a fast talker, someone who really doesn't have much substance. And chances are, if you do a little bit of investigation, you will find that that person doesn't really have a good track record of making a lot of money, and making a lot of money without actually earning it. So I think one word of caution, there are no shortcuts. If someone promises you you'll make $1 million if you give them your money, and you'll make it in 6 months, chances are good that it's a hustle, that it's really not an honest investment. Second, if it's going to happen, if it's real, it doesn't have to happen overnight. You can find a good accountant, an honest accountant, or a good lawyer, an honest lawyer, who you can, run some of these ideas by. And if it's a real estate investment, you go to a real estate lawyer. If it's a, investment in a new business, you really need to be more careful than if it's an investment in something that's been around for a very long time. So I don't know how to answer that question better than those answers.
But the next question is just interesting. It seems like at least like almost half the people over here are either themselves or they know somebody that got affected by a crime, 48 to 52. So it's definitely a lot of people here. It's obviously not something, it's not minimal that people are affected by these things. So just interesting poll to see. Let's jump to the fourth poll. What strategies do you recommend for achieving the right balance between financial trust and remaining vigilant against potential scams in your community? 30% of people feel promote financial education and awareness. 7% say engage the use of legal contracts. Encourage the use of legal contracts. 14% foster a culture of transparency and accountability. And 49% of people most people feel encourage each investor to review and discuss with professionals the potential investment or whatever it is. If it's like I couldn't read the rest of it, but basically to discuss with like whatever you're investing, whether it's real estate or an investment, a return, IPO, whatever it is, speak to people that are the professionals in that industry, review with those lawyers, and let them give you advice. That's 49% of people.
Well, I think, having a contract is almost worthless, because if you are a ganef can create the contract which gives you the sense of security, but maybe isn't worth the paper that it's written on. Because most complicated frauds, white collar frauds, have paper. They have a contract, they have an IPO, they have something that looks real and looks legitimate and yet isn't. My advice is, you have to find someone who you trust, who is an expert in that particular area. Because if you go to a guy who does wills and does house closings and does everything you can imagine, they're not going to have any expertise in a particular area. And if you really have a securities investment, if you have a real estate investment, you have to find somebody who practices or who works in that field. And then you really need to be honest. And I think you need to ask a lot of questions. And if you don't know enough to ask the questions that are going to hopefully make a difference, then you shouldn't be involved in that transaction on your own. There are enough people in our community who are experts in the fields, and I'm not looking for people to call me and ask for advice, because it's not something I really want to undertake. But I think that there are enough people in our community who have managed to make real legitimate successes out of their professional life. And I think, those are people. And if you need to pay someone for a real consultation, pay it. You want to make $10 million, don't, be afraid to spend $1,000 or $2 for a real consultation. Because just talking about something, most professionals who are honest are not going to give you advice. They're going to tell you, and they really don't want to get involved, because giving advice in a business transaction is great. If you're right at the end, you're a hero. And if you're wrong at the end, you've accomplished nothing and you end up in a lawsuit. So my advice is to don't be swayed because it's in a contract that's 20 pages long. Most of the fraud cases I've been in have rooms full of paper that when you really start to analyze it, then it takes sometimes a long time to analyze it. The paper is really used as a disguise to lull you into a false sense of security.
Okay, beautiful. Let's get into the question. I just want to mention a few years ago, personally myself, somebody called me up for an investment, a very unique, type of thing that I was not familiar with. And I called a very wealthy guy and I told him about the investment. And his answer to me was, I don't invest in anything that I don't understand fully, and I don't have the resources to get the details of the investment. And I was very impressed with that answer. I found it to be very like,
it's a very good answer, and if you can't invest rent money. I mean, that's the, the advice I give people. If it's money that's sitting and you don't have any, use up for it at the present time, and today, it's not often the case. But if you've inherited, millions of dollars and you're looking to make more money, there are ways to do it. You can go to a legitimate investment advisor. You can go to somebody who's bonded, who has, a real office and the kind of educational credentials that, make a difference. If it's a guy who's sitting next to you in shul and he says to you, I know you have a lot of money and I want to make you more, chances are that it's somebody who really doesn't have your best interest at heart.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so just a second. Somebody sent in a question. So I guess we can ask that first question. So here we go. I've been contemplating the unique challenges within our community. It appears that our extensive networking for business deals is both a strength and vulnerability, as blind trust in large investments without due diligence and knowledge can be prevalent. Do you believe certain culture or religious factors within the Frum Jewish community contribute to our susceptibility to affinity crimes and Ponzi schemes? Can you share your insight on this matter?
The answer is yes, I do. And, I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I myself, with all of my experience and training, was a victim. And I was a victim because there was a guy, I knew who, davened in the same shul I did. And it would never occur to me that what he was telling me was just, complete nonsense. It sounded good. It sounded intriguing. I wasn't investing rent money. But at the end of the day, 6 months turned into 7 years. And after 7 years, it turned out to be a complete fraud. But, I wasn't suspicious because of who the person was. And, it occurred to me that you'd have to be crazy to want to rip off a guy who does what I do. But, he wasn't crazy. He was just the real, word should I use? Brafman. I think he was, exactly that. I mean, he saw me. I was a live one. People perceive me to be, to some degree successful. And at the end of the day, where you live and how you, conduct your life. And sometimes you give the impression that you are ripe for the picking, as they say. You would be vulnerable. So, yeah, I'm a smart guy, I believe. I'm, in this particular field, I think there aren't a lot of people who have my personal experience, but, I was defrauded. At the end of the day, I learned a very painful lesson. And I think that crime, I think absolutely, if it wasn't who he was and where he lived and where he davened and, how he was perceived by the other people in my community then, I think I would have done a little bit more homework. I was also very busy. I was on trial in a very big case. The amount of money he was asking me for wasn't, it turned out to be a lot, but everything's relative. So it wasn't going to be that I had to sell my house in order to, recover that money. It was money that, you can't say you can afford to lose it, but at the end of the day, losing it didn't really change my life or the life of, my children and grandchildren. So, yeah, I think that's 100% correct. Who the person is, where they approach you, how they approach you, and what it is that they say and what it is that you know about them. Many of the people who we know from our community, unless you're a guy like me now who knows a lot more about most people than the average neighbor, doesn't occur to you that they're, committing a fraud. That you believe that they're, ehrlich and honest and, their kids and your kids, maybe go to yeshiva with their kids. So it would never occur to you that they would want to put themselves in a position where, a guy like me, who was a former prosecutor and is, well-known, criminal defense lawyer, that a guy like me would one day, be a victim of that fraud. So I'm not embarrassed to tell you I was. I learned a very good lesson. Now I ask a lot more questions, or I just walk away. I'm just not interested. It's easy to say I'm not interested than it is, 3-4 years down the road, realize that you've been taken by someone who turns out to be a goner.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So I guess everybody is susceptible. That's the bottom line.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna go to a live question. Hi, sorry, you're on.
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry, it's blurry here, by the way. It's I'm at my office computer. I can't really do anything about it. I was just wondering, does Mr. Brafman feel that are these people that maybe con you, so to speak, are all of them that you might have a situation, maybe they were well-meaning, they maybe meant well, they really thought they were gonna this was a once in a lifetime opportunity, but they were just ignorant. I mean, do you find some of these people are acting out of ignorance, or they they weren't necessarily being cunning or anything like that? I mean, I know I feel like we have a lot of maybe silly, ignorant people in our community. Maybe or do you find these people are deliberately looking for suckers? There might be, I don't know, say a psychopathic streak, whatever.
Well, I
Or,
think
you know,
I think let me interrupt for a minute because I get the thrust of the question. I think
yeah.
they come in all shades, and I've won a lot of cases where at the end of the day the investment did not turn out the way it was proposed to the person who was investing. And one of the elements of every white collar criminal crime, with rare exception, is criminal intent. You have to intend
Mm,
to fraud someone. You have to intend to deceive them. And very often a mistake is a mistake, and a good faith mistake is a complete defense to a crime. In the case that I spoke about where I was victimized, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the person may have had some good intentions at the beginning, but I think as it played out, he became aware that this wasn't going to be real and never informed me. So every case is different. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but the answer to your question is yes. There are people who have themselves been sucked into this game, and they have invested their own money, and then in order to maybe get out of the position that they've allowed themselves in, they needed to bring in more money, or live money as they call it. So yeah, I think every case is different. I've also seen
mm,
cases, as hard as it may be to believe, where people who are just bad people. They're just deep in
yeah.
their heart a ganif, and they don't mind saying something which at the time they say it is fundamentally untrue, and they do it in a way that hides the fraud from being at least discovered by unsuspecting people. So I think it's every fraud is different, and every person who engages in conduct is different. And I start out from the beginning, where I don't think our community in particular is fraudulent at its core. I think to the contrary. I think the manifested and tzedakah and good stuff that we do as Orthodox Jews is extraordinary, and I dare say that it can't be matched by any other community. But in every group there are the exceptions, and because of the work I do, I've seen the exceptions. And to be honest with you, I'm not embarrassed to say that I work very hard on behalf of a person who's a real ganif, to try and do damage control or keep the government from convicting them, which is something I want to talk about later, because I don't think everybody who does something wrong deserves to go to jail for 20 years. And I've made my career in large measure on trying to keep that from happening to people who, despite what they've done, are nevertheless fundamentally good people. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, just to say, my family lost money with the Madoff thing, so I
Well,
can sort of understand. That's
that's a unique
yeah,
unique
yeah.
person.
That's
Kind of that size doesn't come along every 20 minutes.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
Okay,
thank
Mr.
you.
Brafman, let's go to the next question. You're on.
Hi, Mr. Brafman. Thank you for taking my question. So my question is a little similar to Chaisar Cantor, but the idea, I know there's been cases where people offer services or programs, and in the end, unfortunately, the people are not able to get the services or the programs, whatever reason, they cancel, whatever, and you know, either some people think there's something going on, some people actually think, like, they were good people, but the investment wasn't a good investment. And sometimes these people, they say, they went bankrupt or whatever. The whole thing went off. They lost money. They can't do it. So when a person, first of all, what is a person supposed to do to be careful? Like, is this something that a person could be careful? And second of all, is there a way to like prove and get one's money back legally if these type of occurrences happen?
I think getting money back is very, very hard. I mean, most of the people who do this type of fraudulent behavior are doing it because they have their own economic issues. And, Ponzi scheme is essentially defined as someone who commits a crime. And then in order to pay back the early investors, they have to bring in additional investors. And from their money, rather than invest it at all, they use it to pay back the early investors. And then eventually the whole thing collapses. And that's when the government, comes knocking on the door. So I don't think anybody ever gets back their money, although under the federal government victim Restitution Act, if you are a victim and if you write to the government and if the government gets money back, they can give you a pro rata share if you really are a victim. One of the problems, and I think it's something you need to talk to your own accountant, your own lawyer, your own financial advisor about before you register as a victim. I think you have to be certain that, the money that you invested is, as I call it, kosher money, and money that you earn properly, money that you can show, money that you pay taxes on. Because, a lot of people who have, a suitcase of money that's never been declared, then suddenly they want to invest it in something, and then the investment turns out to be a fraud. I think going to the government sometimes is a mistake because it ends up in unwittingly incriminating you. So I think that, and in terms of, how you can make sure, I don't think you can ever be sure unless you have someone who really knows what he or she is doing, really do a deep dive and check this out. And sometimes, people are reluctant to become involved in that type of inquiry because, there are, concerns that, there are, legal issues and, involving, halacha of being a moser, and are you permitted to, inform on somebody who you think has ripped you off? And I think those questions are above my pay grade. If you go to your Rav and you get consultation about those issues, I think if somebody really stole money from you, and if they really were involved in, really, really ripping you off, and you went to a Rav, most Rabbeim would find a heter. They would find a way around the concern of Masira. I should also tell you that the United States government, the New York State government, whatever, city or state or jurisdiction you're listening to this program in, they don't recognize the law of Masira as a defense against testifying. So even if you don't go to the government, if the government finds out that the person has been, committing a fraud, and if they start to subpoena, the victims, and if you decide that you're really not interested in testifying, it's that you don't get out of that obligation by claiming that you really don't want to be a moser, an informant. So I think you need to be very careful how you proceed. And I don't really want to turn this program into Ben Brafman, giving you halachic answers to your questions. So
Thank you so much. Are you able to give some ideas of what is some suspicious behavior or something fishy that we have to look out for? Like
No,
any...
I think every case is fact specific, but as a practical matter, in most cases, in almost every case I've ever been in, part of the pitch to convince you to invest is a guaranteed interest return, and that you are going to have every month 12% on your money. I mean, that's really a very common theme in these cases. And in all of those cases, the one thing that I've always scratched my head is, how could anybody believe that any investment is going to have a guaranteed return in today's world, where so many things, affect the stock market, so much affects the real estate industry. so much affects, the IPOs and the investment opportunities. So anybody who guarantees that you're going to get a fixed return on interest of a certain amount every month, don't give them the money.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Brafman, let's go to the next live question. You're on.
Okay, question. First of all,
Why-
thank you for taking me.
Why am I unable to see the person who's asking me the question?
Yep.
Are you not on camera? My screen doesn't show you at all. Just has I keep trying to find you and I can't.
I could try to turn it on.
No, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Now I see you.
Yes. First, thank you for taking my question.
It obviously wasn't on when you started the question, but it's okay.
Question with regards to cash advance and the many. There's a lot of from people who there's a lot of talk about cash advance and from people who got into the business. What is your general opinion on that topic, if you have one?
Well, if you're saying cash advance and you're not talking about cash, you're not talking about mazumin, if you're talking about a loan document and the money is advanced either in a wire to your account or in a check that you're being given, I don't believe that there's anything per se illegal about being involved in the cash advance business. On the other hand, a lot of those businesses don't play by any rules. They are, people who have a lot of cash. They have a lot of cash or mazumin, as you might refer to it, and they want to try and make money on it. So they lend you $5,000 in cash, and you then give them a certain amount of interest on that, every month or every quarter. And then at the end, you give them back the money when you're able to do that. But if you're asking me, is it per se an illegal business? I don't believe it is, but I think a lot depends on the terms. A lot depends on how it's being done. And you also have to be careful that, there's criminal usury statutes in most states where if you lend somebody money and you charge them a certain amount of interest, the person who is lending the money may be involved in basically trying to be a glorified loan shark, where you're trying to make more money on your money than the law permits. So I don't think, to answer your question, that it's an automatic crime if you're involved in the cash advance business. But a lot of them don't play by the rules that the government requires of people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next live question. You're on.
Hi, Mr. Brafman. How are you?
Hey, you saw.
Good. So here's my question. So if after investing, I learned that it is a Ponzi scheme, but only I learned it's a Ponzi scheme, and I want to influence the fraudster to pay me back ahead of everyone else, right? And my threat is I'll let everyone know it's a Ponzi scheme, or I'll go to the government and let them know. Is that a form of blackmail or extortion, or can I actually do that to make sure I get my money back?
Well, I think the way you phrase it, I don't think it's allowed to do that. I think if you threaten someone that if they don't give you back your money, you're going to expose them to criminal prosecution, I think that is defined as a crime of extortion. Maybe not exactly in those terms, but I think most jurisdictions have a statute that doesn't allow you to gain an advantage in a criminal, by threatening criminal prosecution. So, I mean, I've been in those cases where people have come to me and said, I want to go to the government and tell them that, this guy ripped me off, but I won't go if they pay me back. I think there's a way to do that legally, but it's not in the way that you suggest. I also think that if you do that, then I think some of the other people who have invested, when it ultimately comes out that you knew it was a fraud and you chose to not tell them, but cut your own deal with the government, if you are a lawyer, for example, then I think you could expose yourself to some ethical issues. So if that presents itself as a way of trying to get your money back, I would really think it through and talk it through with someone who really knows what they're doing. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Here's another interesting question that came in. The question is that by not giving these people the consequences that they should get, are we like telling people that they can do it? Are we allowing more people to do fraud if they see that the consequences might not be so harsh?
Well, I don't know. I don't understand the question, because most of the people who commit frauds know what the potential consequences can be, and they just assume that no one's going to catch them. So if you're asking me, do you have an obligation to, turn them in so that nobody else gets, involved in this? I think, everybody has to make their own decision when it comes to that. But I also think that a lot of the people who do this and do it intentionally, I think they know what they're doing is against the law. I don't believe many of them understand the extent of the consequences that they might face, because I have people who come to my office and they tell me what they've done, and they ask me what's the maximum sentence that they could get. And and I tell them, they think I'm scaring them to try and get them to retain me. But the fact is that today, the way white collar cases are prosecuted by primarily the federal government, a person could be in much more trouble if they are involved in a securities fraud, much more trouble if they involve themselves in a Ponzi scheme than if they went out tomorrow and held up a liquor store using a gun. Because if it's your first offense and you've never done this before, I think I could talk most prosecutors into coming down to a very reasonable sentence where you may not have to go to jail. You may have to go to jail for months instead of years. But if you're involved in a fraud that results in a several $1 million loss, or it involves a loss to a government agency, I think the consequences could be very severe. And I've seen, I read these, decisions that come down from Law 360. They publish these opinions or these news reports about cases all over the United States. And I can tell you, I see sentences of 15, 20 years routinely in cases of a Medicaid fraud, or in cases of healthcare fraud, or in cases of securities fraud. But if you went out tomorrow, even if you attacked someone, or even if you, put somebody in a hospital, the chances are very good that if it's your first time and you've never done this before, maybe you're looking at, a 1 or 2, 3-year sentence maximum instead of a 15 or 20-year sentence. So I think what people don't understand is that, for 50 years, the government really only prosecuted violent crimes and drug crimes. And, they really didn't try and punish people who stole money. And now the pendulum has swung all the way back. And, a lot of very successful people who've never been in trouble before suddenly get involved in, a crime that rips off a government agency. And I'll give you a perfect example. After the pandemic, a lot of programs were developed by the government to try and help businesses survive. So a lot of businesses who were closed down or who had to close down in order to keep their businesses alive, there were programs, payroll protection program, where if a small business, was struggling to stay alive and they could qualify and they submitted all of their tax returns and their payroll returns, the government could give them a loan. And many of those loans were forgiven if the company survived and if the employees survived. So a lot of people said, oh, I got a great idea. I have a mom and pop shop that has, 1 employee, but I'm going to tell the government I have 20 employees. And suddenly the checks came in $300,000-$400,000, whereas the actual cost to the business was maybe $50,000. And judges throughout the United States see those cases as very, very unsympathetic, because you took advantage of a program that was instituted to try and help people survive something that nobody ever experienced before, and you took advantage of the program. And I've seen people in cases where, they had no explanation. And when they say to me, how did they know I had, only 1 employee? And now I told them I have 20 employees. So, well, your tax ID number, is punched into a computer, and your payroll, taxes for the last 5 years before the pandemic were, $12,000. And now suddenly you're claiming they were $200,000. Businesses don't grow like that. Certainly not in the midst of a pandemic. So a lot of people don't think this through, and a lot of people who don't think it through, if they're from our community, it's because they believe that they have, what a lot of people think is a chap, and a chap is, I got a way to get over on somebody else. And if I'm stealing from the government, the government isn't a victim and the government doesn't lose the money. So I've convinced myself, I had a guy in the bribery case who bribed a customs official. And his defense to me before he, when he met me was, my grandfather, in order for him to save our family, had to bribe a border official. Otherwise, none of us would be alive. And my response was, what does that have to do with something you did, 60 years after the Shoah? So, I mean, it's hard, but it's true. So I think the programs that are being ripped off routinely, and I don't mean by our community, but routinely throughout the United States, if you see the sentences imposed by judges, you would think they raped the 10-year-old if they got 20 years in prison. And at the end of the day, the guy who raped, a child got 5 years, and this guy got 15 years. So you can't explain it, you can't understand it, but those are the facts.
Okay, let's jump into another question over here. People just want to understand what's the difference between an affinity crime and a Ponzi scheme, and if you could explain so people understand what it is and how to safeguard from it.
An affinity crime is a crime where the crime is able to be committed because of the people who are victimized. And an affinity crime, if somebody goes to everybody they know in the minion and they convince them to invest with them and they get ripped off and it's a fraud from the beginning, the judges consider that to be an affinity crime, because if it was not for them knowing you and trusting you and seeing you as someone who is, praying in the same synagogue or going to the same, shiurim, as someone who they believe is, really being an honest, ehrlich person, they don't have their guard up. So there isn't a complete definition that I've ever seen. But I think the judges who have used the term affinity crime, it's whether it's in a synagogue or in a church or in a school board, or there are people who belong to the same, program or the same school or the same club, they take advantage of the relationships. A Ponzi scheme doesn't really involve only people who have that circle of trust. The Ponzi scheme is someone who has figured out a way to sell an investment that sounds too good to be true. And because it sounds too good to be true, a lot of people, give them money, because if it's too good to be true, I'm going to make a lot of money. And chances are something that's too good to be true generally isn't true. So I think you have to be very careful.
Okay, that brings me actually to the next question. I have a close friend who frequently seeks out real estate deals and investments with great enthusiasm. While he does a lot of time, he makes money with all his, wild investments. I'm concerned that he could be an easy target for a scheme. As a friend, what advice could I offer him? I see he's investing in this, he's investing in that, he's wild. The guy calls him, I have a real estate deal, he gets very, but again, some of them are successful. So as a friend, what could I talk to him or advise him before he gets burnt?
Well, I think, eventually someone like that will get burnt. But I think what you can tell them is that if something is so attractive because it has the potential for doubling or tripling or making 10 times your money, I think it's worth paying a few dollars to a real estate lawyer to actually examine the proposition. And if it's in another state, if it's in another country, you really have to be much more careful than if it's in the community in which you live, where you're able maybe to understand the value of the local properties. So if someone says to you, give me $50,000, I'm buying a shopping center in Kansas, and it's on a good, corner, and it's very busy, and those are things that some local person down there can check out. And chances are that if it's being propositioned in that way, unless it's someone who works for a bank or has some real estate affiliation that's really legitimate, then I think you have to be careful. But when you're telling me this guy is, wild and he's investing here and he's investing there, and sometimes the investment, makes him a lot of money, who are you to tell him not to do this? I mean, maybe he's going to say, yeah, what are you talking about? I made $1 million last week. And that's one of the differences in real estate. The real estate people who are flipping properties, they have the potential every once in a while to really hit a home run, where they buy a building for $1 million, and then 2 months later or 2 years later, they're able to sell it for $10 million. Real businesses don't operate that way. Real estate is, an industry unique unto itself, where, sometimes you can hit a home run if you know what you're doing, or if the person who you're giving your money to knows what they're doing. But if it's someone who's all over the place and he or she is investing, in a new deal every 20 minutes, then chances are that they speak well. And they have, what people refer to as a gift for gab, because there are people who are very talented and very good con people, that they know exactly what to say, or to push your button, or to get you to believe them. And that's one of the problems, when someone has a lot of money but doesn't have a lot of real skill or a lot of real experience in a particular area, because they're interested in making more money more quickly than they are in doing an investigation.
I know we spoke about this a little bit, but I want to ask the question again, but I think it's good to just really get to it again. Do you think a specific personality traits or characteristics that made someone more inclined to engage in the financial crimes, right? Like we discussed in the polls. It seems to me like my friends who are smart, and some of them even educated, get very excited, also like very childlike when they're sitting around the shul talking to make a deal, and they almost like lose their sense of like, miyusha v'das, like being thought out. So do you see, like, again, we spoke about it a little bit, I just want to get a little more detail on that. You know what I mean? Is there like some type?
If you were to put me into any shul and give me 6 months to sit there and watch, I could spot 3 or 4 people who I would tell you, just be careful of that person. There's a guy in Lawrence, so I really can't say much about, because I represented him once, but he's one of those guys, and he can't stop. So will I represent him again? No. And wasn't his first time either. So I think I have the ability at times to spot them. But then, here I was, big shot criminal defense lawyer, and I got taken. So what do you want me to tell you? I don't think it's not a science. There's no, you don't mix the chemicals and it turns blue and the guy's a ganef. It doesn't work like that. And I think also, some people are better than others. Some people are more intense about the work that they do, or the people who they try and raise money from. But chances are that people who are going about the daily business of trying to raise money in a fraudulent way, I think you can find out a lot about them to explain what is wrong with them and what's going on and why you should be careful.
I find it interesting that some of these people have very hadibra, like they could talk to somebody. Some of them are very good talkers. They can scam somebody once and then scam them a second time.
Well, there was a guy I represented about, 25 years ago in the diamond industry. And I represented him because he was a victim, and he was a victim of a big fraud, and he lost several $1 million. And then the person who ripped him off got caught, went to jail. And a couple of years ago, he came to me and he said, I just want you to know I invested with him again. And I said, why? He says, because he had the goods that I needed. And I said, then you deserve whatever happens to you. But that's sometimes what happens. People need the service, need a product, and the person who claims to have it is someone who they know doesn't have a good reputation, but they need it, so they let the guard down, and then sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. The problem with this discussion, and I used this phrase before, is a lot of these cases are fact specific. So there isn't any across the board rule except that if someone guarantees you a certain amount of interest every month, I would stay away, because there is no industry, there is no business where you can legitimately guarantee a certain return. Now, if you get 1 or 2% in a bank on the money that's sitting there, and 20 years ago you could get 6 or 7%, that should tell you something. The banks then gave 6 or 7% because that was the nature of the economy. Today, those banks are giving 1 or 2%. And if you want to tie up your money, maybe you could get an additional percent by putting it into a CD or a money market account, which doesn't let you withdraw your money for a particular time. But those are financial institutions. But even financial institutions, if you look at their prospectuses, they say to you, our projections are based on our assessment of current business environment, and things could change. So if you look at all the prospectuses that are being sent out with IPOs, I mean, every one of them has, you cover your tuchus language on every single page. This is our idea. This is our projection. It's based on a good faith analysis, but we're not guaranteeing this return. So if a brokerage house isn't going to be able to guarantee a return, then Shmuel Yankel isn't going to be able to do it either.
There's a lot of stocks that give annuities and dividends. All the big companies, McDonald's, all these things.
But they're blue chip stocks, and the very, very established companies. And yes, a lot of them do give you a good return. But look what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a very established brokerage house and teams of lawyers who sign off. And yet every day you find these class actions against many of these companies where their projections or their broadcast or their intentions, they didn't live up to them. And that's how class action lawyers end up making, a lot of money. That's an industry which always intrigues me. The class action lawyers end up making $100 million, and the investors who lost the money, they get a coupon, or they get, $12. So it's a good country, America. What can I tell you?
Let's jump onto this. Through all your years of being a lawyer, what common misconceptions you've seen in the regular individuals like myself tend to hold at the law about how the criminal justice system operates? For instance, some of us may not be fully grasp how seamlessly small actions like cashing someone else's check or signing for somebody else relate to the justice system. Like in our society, we cash checks or we'll do something like, by us, we look at it as a very basic thing, certain things that people do, like chesed or help somebody. Like, what are we missing in the legal system? How do they view that?
Well, I think, again, it depends on what you're doing. Because if somebody gives you a check for $500 and says, can you cash this for me? And it turns out to be, not a real check, or doesn't have any money, and then you deposit the check and it's on a closed account. Yeah, those cases can result in a prosecution or fraud, but you're not talking about big deal. Whereas if somebody gives you wants you to take a check for $1 million and give them 800,000 because you see yourself making 200,000, it's generally not a real transaction. And a lot depends on the amount of money involved, and a lot depends on what you're being asked to do. If someone says, do you mind if I sign your name to something? I mean, I just would never let somebody do that, because you have no idea what they're signing and how, and you're going to be involved in a substantial fraud that you will never extricate yourself from. And if your position is, well, I trusted them and it never occurred to me that this was going to be part of some criminal transaction, I mean, the real question would be, well, what did you think was going on? Why did they need to sign your name? Why did they need permission from you to sign their name? And people who have a good name in the community and who are known as successful people, they get requisitioned a lot to do stuff that doesn't at first blush pass the smell test. There's something wrong with a transaction. I spoke in a SIFA a couple of years ago, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago in Borough Park, and there were 2,000 people in the Vizhnitz shul in Borough Park for this lecture. And it was an interesting topic, but the topic is similar to the ones we're talking about now. And out of 2,000 people there was only one question. And it wasn't a question on, it was someone came up to me when it was finished, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I looked at him and I said, "What?" And he said, "Is it wrong to have 2 social security cards in my name?" And I said, "Why would you need 2 social security cards in your name?" As well, and then he started and he saw and he ran away. So, I mean, this was the one question I was asked after I spoke for an hour and a half to 2,000 people. So, one question.
I was going to ask you that question, but okay, you covered it.
Here's another interesting question that came in. Given your role as a leader in our community, which includes many affluent members involved in various business deals, how do you suggest we educate and protect our communities against affinity crimes and Ponzi schemes?
I think one of the ways is a program like this, because, to the extent that some of the people who are listening might, one day be approached to become involved in Ponzi scheme, maybe the program like this will give them a time to pause or ask a second question, and then maybe they are. And then I think quite frankly, I think the conversation really starts in high school. Because one of the things I found, and look, I'm a frum guy. My brother was a Rosh Yeshiva. My son is now a Rosh Yeshiva. So it's not like I'm a guy who doesn't have any connection to the community. And I happen to be wearing a yarmulke, although maybe you can't see it. But I'm a Shomer Shabbos guy. So when I say something like this, I'm not trying to take wild swings at our community. But you have guys coming out of the yeshivas today who don't know a lot about the real world. And maybe there's a reason why it's like that, but no math, no science, no English, and suddenly they graduate, and suddenly they get married, and then they have to buy a house, and suddenly they don't have a job, but they need health insurance, and then suddenly they're making stuff up, or they go to work for the father or father-in-law, and nobody ever teaches them the way to do things the right way. So it's called the term I've often heard them use is shmedre. I'm smarter than you, so this is how I'm going to do it. And don't tell me it's wrong. Don't tell me it's illegal. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to catch me. And even if they do, what's the big deal? And suddenly they're, buying a car, and because they, don't have a job, they make up a job, and suddenly it becomes a problem. And these crimes lead to a mindset, to a mentality, which basically says a couple of things. One, I don't think anybody's being hurt by this because it's only an insurance company, or it's only a bank, or it's only a government. So there's no, widow orphan who I'm stealing from. That's first. Second, nobody's going to catch it because there's so much stuff going on. Nobody's going to catch it. And what they don't realize is today, everything is computerized. It may take the government 2 or 3 years to catch you, but they will eventually, because it's on your social security number, or it's your date of birth, and it's so many identifying numbers that you can't really do something like that without giving out too much identifying information. So, those are some of the excuses that I hear. But when you're asking me, how can our community learn? I think it has to start with the community. I once was a part of a small group of men from our community, and they weren't all criminal lawyers. Some were Rosh Yeshivas, some were businessmen, and we all tried to figure out how to get on top of this. And we gave up because the issue is too big, and there are too many, unfortunately, people who it would affect. So, when the Frum family has 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 children, it's good. It's a big mitzvah, and I understand it, but you got to make a lot of money to be able to support a family that big. And if you're living in Williamsburg or Borough Park and you need an apartment for that many people, you got to make a lot of money to have an apartment that big. So, suddenly you're applying for Section 8 housing. And Section 8 housing is a government program where they supplement the rental payments that you would otherwise have to make. But if you don't qualify for it, you have a problem. But and many people have 2 payrolls. They have a payroll which is on a W-2 form, and then they have a payroll which is half on a W-2 form and half under the table in cash. And if nobody finds out about it, nothing's going to happen. But eventually, sometimes the government comes knocking on the door. And, the people who run these businesses are going to end up getting prosecuted, and the employees who work there are going to end up getting prosecuted, or if they're given immunity, it's only if they'll testify against the people who they work for. So it's a bad situation. I don't have an answer for you. And the answer is just like too complicated and too expensive, because, the amount of money that would be involved in trying to take all of the people who are sitting in Kollel today and learning and give them a parnasa, it's very hard. It's very hard to figure out how to do that. And a lot of people who have a lot more money than I do have tried to approach it, but you're talking about billions of dollars. That's billions with a B. And, I'm not certain that, anybody can undertake it on their own.
Okay. What could somebody do practically if somebody fell into a Ponzi scheme to get the money back? Besdin, courts, what's those steps that you take?
I don't think Besdin is going to have any ability to get your money back, because in order for them to get the money back, the person who took the money has to really abide by the same Besdin. So you get a psak from a Besdin, and the person who took the money to begin with says, I'm not interested, thank you very much. But, I don't believe in that Besdin, but there are sometimes a Besdin works. So I don't want to be the guy who says, don't go to Besdin, but I'm saying I don't think Besdin is the answer, because if someone is basically ripping off a from person in a Ponzi scheme that affects per se the from community, I don't think they're concerned about a psak from Besdin. I think they're worried about staying out of jail, but I'm not certain that a psak from Besdin is going to give them much sleepless nights. That's just my own opinion, and I don't want to, suddenly somebody call me tomorrow and said you're an apokyrus.
Okay, somebody sent in a question. It's a little bit off topic, but let's get into it a little bit if that's okay. Ben, you were in Eretz Yisrael, during when the war broke out. You're not new to media bias and misinformation, but what do you think about such a venomous attitude towards Eretz Yisrael, and like what should we do about it? You're familiar with how media plays and stuff like that, so people just want to know what your take is on that.
Well, when the war broke out, and when we realized the horrific acts that Hamas, really committed and committed, I remember saying to a Rav, I think these are maybe the worst, horrific acts of barbarity since the Shoah, since the Holocaust. So I think Israel is going to have 3 days, in my opinion, 3 days where much of the world is going to be on their side, and then it's going to start turn against them. And, to me, it's just not only intellectual dishonesty, but the word I use over and over again is just stupidity. But it's more than stupidity. I think throughout our life and the history of our lives, my mother's parents were murdered at Auschwitz, but at the time they were being fed into gas chambers. I think the world basically stood by, knew what they were doing and knew what was going on, but it was Jews. And I think, Jewish blood has always been cheap. And now it's Israel. And, nobody doubts for a minute that what Hamas did was just horrific. Nobody doubts that. What they have forgotten already, though, is that Hamas did it, and Hamas started the war. And when you look at what's happening in Gaza today, and you realize that there are thousands of young Palestinians who are really paying the price, I think they forget that they're paying the price because Hamas has victimized the entire population and put them made them shields for Israel's response. And I think Eretz Yisrael doesn't have a choice. It's a terrible thing to say, but I think unless they eliminate Hamas, they're going to have to deal with them again. And I think, when the United States said we got to eliminate ISIS, the rest of the world said good. And when, Israel says we got to eliminate Hamas, for a couple of days, even CNN, which was never pro-Israel, even CNN was pro-Israel in terms of the right to defend itself. And even, Joe Biden, who's always been a good friend of Eretz Yisrael, was not embarrassed to say Israel has a right to defend itself. But when, the chairman of the United Nations, which has always pretty much been a useless institution, in my opinion, when the chairman said that what happened, what Hamas did was terrible, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, I think, the world should have been stunned, but look what's happening on the best universities in the United States: Columbia, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania. The top schools in the country have thousands of pro-Palestinian students who are, criticizing Eretz Yisrael for essentially defending itself. And not one of those protesters ever said what Hamas did was terrible, but we feel bad for the Palestinians in Gaza. And when you see what's happening in Gaza, and when you realize that what Hamas did was, quite frankly, very smart in the way they have surrounded themselves with tunnels and took hostages, they knew that the hostages would be, make what Eretz Yisrael is trying to do very difficult. But to, Israel's credit, they decided, and I'll tell you very honestly, and I don't say this now because now's not the time, but there are going to be a lot of questions in Eretz Yisrael when this war is over. I mean, how did the army just let this happen? And how did the government just let this happen? And who was asleep at the switch? And I predict that, their heads are going to roll when this is over. But right now, that's not the topic that we should be discussing. Right now, I think the topic, and I'm not a crazy person, and I'm not, a right-wing extremist, but I think that at some point, ad kan is the expression, up until now. And right now, the sympathy should not be directed at the people of Gaza. And the people of Gaza have allowed Hamas to build these tunnels in plain view. What did they think they were building? A subway station? I mean, what did they think? And what did the United Nations think when they were storing rockets and ammunition under UN charter schools? And what did the hospitals think when they were building a Hamas network of tunnels underneath the hospitals? And when Israel, a couple of weeks ago, got blamed for the hospital that was blown up, when it first started, it was Israel bombed the hospital and there were 500 people killed. That was the first headline. And then as people began to evaluate and examine the evidence, they realized, one, it was a rocket fired from Gaza that misfired and fell onto the hospital. And suddenly the number of people who were killed went from 10 to 50, not 500. But you know what? The rest of the world, or certainly these morons who are, throwing themselves around Columbia and Harvard and the UFP, all of those people, they don't talk about that. They just talk about the fact that Israel has an army and Gaza doesn't have its own army. But Gaza has 2 million people who have been held hostage by Hamas. And I think that we knew that eventually the tide was going to turn and the media was going to be not on Israel's side in this matzab, and they've never been on Israel's side throughout the history of the war. And they were very, very impressed with Israel in 1967 because it was an ace. How did Israel be able to, win that war? But in 1973, when it looked like Israel was going to lose the war, you could see all of the Arab states were cheering and that they were hoping that, Golda Meir and Ariel Sharon would never be able to figure out how to turn that war around. So, we've been dealing with Hamas for now at least 20 years. And what they have done is they've recognized that, and I'm speaking about this tomorrow night at Nassau County Jewish Lawyers Association. And in doing a little bit of research, I found a couple of things that nobody mentions. Most of the leaders of Hamas don't live in Gaza. They live in Qatar. They live in Qatar, however you pronounce it. And they are worth billions of dollars. Where did that money come from? All of that money was humanitarian aid that went to Gaza to build universities, to build schools. And what they didn't, they built tunnels. And you can't build that tunnel network without everyone in Gaza being aware of it, not just the people who run Gaza, but all of the Palestinian citizens who live there, the children, the adults, the elderly, They knew what was going on. And now suddenly, because, Hamas put them in the line of fire, suddenly Israel is to blame for killing all of these, innocent civilians. First of all, I don't believe that they're innocent civilians because they allowed Hamas to develop an arsenal and they allowed them to develop terror tunnels. And a couple of years ago, if you remember, those tunnels were going to open up under a kibbutz on Rosh Hashanah, and they were going to kill hundreds of people who were davening. So the Israel closed the tunnels, and now we're right back where we started from. So I think, while I don't give Netanyahu credit for allowing this to happen, I do give him credit by deciding that you got to end, Hamas now. And they ended ISIS, and I think with, Hashem's help, they'll end, Hamas. But I'm very concerned that as we send, soldiers on the ground invasion of Hamas, that there are going to be many, many casualties, unfortunately. And I'm not certain that that's the way it should be done. I think they should continue to bomb them and drop these cluster bombs that penetrate, the tunnels and, kill all these, terrorists. And that's what they are. They're not militants. The newspapers begin to, talk about them as being militants. They're not militants. They're terrorists. And when you call somebody a militant, you suggest that, well, they have a right to fight. When you call somebody a terrorist, they don't. But if you're asking me what causes this media to turn, I think it comes down to the fact that for however long I've been alive, and I'm 75, so I'm as old as Israel, but however long, I've been alive, Jewish blood has been cheap. If it's Jews who are being killed, a couple of people will say, oh, that's terrible, but they'll go to the next page. It's only us who have mishpacha there and who have children and grandchildren there, and who, everyone I know knows people who are in the army. And whether it's our kids or our grandchildren, that's nieces and nephews and cousins. I mean, my wife has, 15 cousins who are in the army now, who are lawyers and doctors, and they were called up, and now they're not on their jobs. In Eretz Yisrael now, the law firms are empty. The accounting firms are empty. The hospitals are being staffed, but not all of the people who they were staffed with before. I mean, I have a cousin who's an emergency medicine guy. He's on the front lines. And, to be honest with you, I heard a drasha from Mayor Weinberg, I don't remember his name. Weinberg was a guest speaker in our shul, and he said, I have 3 words: do our part. Those were 3 words. You don't want to fight? Do our part. Stock the shelves in the stores. Help change the beds in the hotel for the displaced person. There's a cheder in Ramat Eshkol that I built in memory of my late brother, of Aaron Brafman, Shalom. And my son is the Rosh Yeshiva. He has 6 Talmidim in there who are displaced kids from the South who came there and whose parents are being housed and fed. And the kids are going to the cheder in Ramat Eshkol because they can't go to the cheder that they used to go to. And it's just amazing. And, we have a cousin, and Saul, who was on one of the questioners a little while ago. We have a cousin who is an army doctor. We said to him, what do you need? So he said, I need portable, and I don't remember what, but it's a device which lets you take like a CAT scan or a portable one, so they can read it on the phone. They're frontline doctors. So my son and his wife managed to raise enough money. They bought 10 of them, and everybody's doing their part. Not everybody's in the army, but we have chayalim. And this morning in our shul, a young boy sang the tefillah for the chayalim, and he had a beautiful voice. But when he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. So I think it's basically Jewish blood is cheap. To the world, Jewish blood has always been cheap.
Terrible.
And it's a terrible matzab, and I don't know what the solution is. Because if you do a ground invasion, you're going to lose thousands of chayalim. Because in addition to and I don't wish it chas v'shalom, I'm just stating that which I think, unfortunately, is obvious. Unless, look, They rescued the hostages in Entebbe. I'm praying for a nace like that.
Amen. Okay, let's go to a few more questions. You're on.
Okay, so getting back to the subject of tonight. So you mentioned earlier about people being unaware and uneducated and doing things that are illegal to be able to support the family, getting paid off the books, things like that. Suppose somebody, got into such a situation or they got into a situation, where maybe they weren't completely honest about what they were selling, was, trying to raise funds for an investment. I guess, is there a community resource, or where would they turn to be able to get their stuff in order and stay with the law, get back with the law, without opening themselves to the vulnerability of of prosecution? Is that something that they would have to contact their lawyer for? Is there some other way that people who maybe got into a situation which potentially they could get prosecuted for, to be able to get back in compliance on their own, so that they avoid continuing on that path?
All right, so I'm going to take a wild guess, but I'm not going to give you what I think is very important legal advice, because there are enough bells and whistles in your question for me to understand that I don't know that you're asking this question just out of idle curiosity. So my advice to you is look for a lawyer who knows what he or she is doing. Sit down in a privileged conversation. Let them know exactly what the facts are, and don't hold back and don't sugarcoat it. And if they know what they're doing, maybe they'll be able to, give you some advice. I can also tell you from my experience, if someone, goes to the government before the government comes to you, not every case is this a good idea, but in some cases it is. And in some cases, with the person who knows the way around and understands the dynamics of what something like that may involve, sometimes it's a good idea, but not always. So I think that you need to really get some personal advice from someone who you trust, and it's not on an open air discussion like this. It should be in a privileged conversation. All right.
And is that specifically only with a lawyer, or is that something accountants do? And I'm not asking for myself. I know a lot of people that without realizing it, get introduced to a job where they're told that some of it's off the books or whatever it is, and then they want to apply for a program, and then they can't put it on the books. They can't mention the income that they have, because that implicates their employer. And the point is, it sort of inadvertently, or without being aware of the consequences, people get into situations. You mentioned about privileged conversation. Is there privileged, do accountants have privileged conversations? There community resources? Where could somebody feel safe to be able to, are there lawyers that specialize in things like this? Because we're talking about where there isn't a case yet, there isn't a prosecution yet. And you mentioned sometimes it'd be helpful to, to let the government know what kind of person would have the ins and outs and understand the right guidance for such a person.
I think it would have to be a lawyer if you want it to be privileged, or if it's a lawyer and an accountant. If the accountant is retained by the lawyer, maybe the conversation can also be privileged under certain circumstances. But I'm not certain that an accountant by themselves are going to have any way to insulate that conversation or make it privileged. So I think it's going to have to be a lawyer. But if a lawyer then retains an accountant and they work together, that can extend the privilege from the lawyer to the accountant. All right.
Thank you.
Well,
It's an interesting question, Mr. Brafman. Somebody's in the trouble and they're asking, dealing with the emotional stress and anxiety that comes with a criminal case has been overwhelming for me. I'm currently awaiting trial, which can result in a lengthy sentence. And despite taking anti-anxiety medication, I still struggle to sleep at night. Do you have any recommendations for managing the emotions and the anxiety of this period of time?
I don't think so. I once gave an award to a cancer doctor at a dinner where I was the master of ceremonies for a cancer program, and we gave an award to a doctor, and the doctor, we then sat down, and he was sitting at the same table, and he said to me, you're Ben Brafman. I said, yes. He says, I've always wanted to meet you. I said, why? He says, because, I'm an oncologist and you're a criminal lawyer. I don't think anybody's ever been happy to meet you or anybody's been happy to meet me. And I said, yeah, but let me tell you why we don't have a lot in common. When you lose, they die. When I lose, I get letters for 5, 10, 15 years. Second, when you lose, there is no humiliation factor. People don't get embarrassed or alienate someone with cancer. God, to the contrary, the family gathers around them. They are more supportive. They become closer, and they deal with the disease together. When I have a client who is involved in criminal conduct, and suddenly it's going to become public, sometimes nobody is left to talk to except me. And to be honest with you, I'm not trying to exaggerate this. I can't imagine a more harrowing nightmare than to lay in bed at night and think to yourself that you may end up in prison for something that you have done. And at the end of the day, it's a terrible, terrible thing to contemplate. And there's no real medicine that I know what you have, and here's a prescription, and it's going to go away. A lot of what I do is by experience and knowledge.
As a lawyer, you don't write prescriptions?
No. I represent people who sometimes write prescriptions, but no, I don't write prescriptions. I wish there was a prescription, to be honest with you, make my job a lot easier. But if a person has, everybody I represent has anxiety, and if they tell you they don't, they're lying, and if they don't, then their family does. And there's a terrible scene. I'll tell you, I've said this before, but a terrible scene that I saw in a prison. Of course, in this prison, the family visits and the legal visits were in the same room. And at a table near me, I was sitting with a client, and at the next table was a family, and it was unfortunately a frum family, and with a lot of children around this guy, and the visiting hours for family visits were over, and the bell goes off, and the family is told they have to leave, and the wife is gathering her children to leave, and this little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with payas and the yarmulke, and he's being pulled by the mother to go out, and he says to the father, "Tati kimaheim," "Daddy, come home," and the father says, "Kenish, I can't," and he says again, "Tati kimaheim," "Daddy, please come home," and the father kept saying he can't, and the little boy started to cry hysterically, and the mother had to pick him up and carrying him out. There wasn't the people who understood what was going on, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And it was, a terrible, I'll never forget that scene as long as I live. So, my suggestion is if you don't want to have that scene play out, then don't be a smart guy. Don't be too smart. My mother, Allah Shalom, used to say, klieg, klieg, klieg de bistanar. You're smart, you're really a fool. And there's a lot to be said for that, because every Chevraman who thinks that he or she is never going to get caught and always going to get away, and when they get away, they're not going to be sent to jail. There's going to be a day of reckoning. And if you're asking me, what do I do about anxiety? I'm not certain. You go to a doctor, you can go to a psychiatrist, you can tell them what's going on in your life, but I'm not certain that the medicine that you get really works.
Well, this conversation brings us to somebody sent in a question. I deeply regret my actions. I stole money from people, and my family and I are now suffering the consequences. I know I made a terrible mistake. People view me with disdain and lack of compassion, including our community's religious rabbis and leaders. I want to make amends and reintegrate in our frum society. What guidance can you offer? And could you help explain to others how I'm still a human being seeking a second chance within our community.
Well, I try and do that a lot, but usually with sentencing judges, not with members of the community. But in my experience, and whether this is good or bad, everybody is entitled to, mechila, and everybody is entitled to, a second chance. And I have found quite honestly, depending on the community, depending on the area in which you live, depending on the nature of the crime, depending on the kind of crime, depending on whether you have to go to jail, how long you have to go. Everybody is different, and a lot of people who get in trouble have nevertheless fundamentally good people. And sometimes it's not because I intended to rip off everybody I know. Sometimes it's I made some terrible mistakes, and I made I used bad judgment. So a lot depends on the nature of the person. A lot depends on what that person's reputation was before, and a lot of communities are very forgiving. So I don't know what that person's question is from, and I can't really give general advice on the kind of answer, because I think, again, everything is unique to the individual and the community, and a lot depends on who the person is and what they've done.
Okay, let's cover on one last question, then we'll go to the closing part, Mr. Brafman. There's a concept. Is it true that there's a belief that if you steal money from people and you have a lot of money put away on the side, and you hire a top-notch lawyer, let's say, like, for example, Mr. Brafman or something like that, that you'll receive a very lenient sentence, possibly just, short period of time. So some people have the myth that, I'll do whatever I want, and if I get in trouble, I have a few $1 million put away, and that will protect me. What's your take on that?
Sometimes they're right. What can I tell you? Sometimes they're right. Doesn't make it right, but sometimes they're not, wrong. Sometimes, if they've done something bad, but the facts are defensible. And sometimes, people who commit a crime and they go to trial and they get found not guilty, even though technically they did what they're accused of. But, every case has, every crime has certain elements, and the government's required to prove those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And sometimes, you can go to trial, and sometimes you have an element that the government can't prove, like specific criminal intent. Sometimes they can prove what happened, but they can't prove, why it happened. And sometimes, a good lawyer working within the law can figure out a defense. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes a what otherwise would be a serious crime doesn't result in a very severe sentence. Sometimes it does. So, every case is different, and it's really hard to predict the outcome. So I think, if that person goes about, his theft or stealing or fraud with the thought that, when I get caught, I have money and I'm going to be able to have a good lawyer and I'm not going to have to go to jail, maybe they're right. But if they're wrong, they're going to be in for a rude awakening, as they say. Suddenly, they turn to, to go away, and the handcuffs come on, and suddenly it's a very sobering moment. But I've seen, a lot of people who have done things that the law doesn't permit, but because of some defect in the case or credibility issues involving, some of the government's witnesses, or some, challenge to the law that's unique to that type of crime, sometimes they don't pay the consequences. But I will tell you that even, people who get found not guilty, I can tell you I've seen people age 10 years as a result of a 6-month process. So if people think that they're going to go about doing this and it's not going to matter, and at the end of the day, maybe they'll hire a good lawyer and it'll go on with their life. Yeah, maybe they will. But even if they will, their life's never going to be the same as a result. And, I've seen children decide never again to speak to their parent as a result of what what they've done. They'll put them through. So, that's a price that some people really don't think about when they go down that path. So, my advice is to just try and live like you're supposed to live. I don't know what to tell you. I don't want to put myself out of business, and I'm not, worried that I will, regardless what I say, because it's a big world, and everybody is an individual, and some people think differently than others. But I think that if you're going to give some advice across the board on a program like this, my advice is it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. However much money you make, the risk that you run is that you get caught and you go to prison, and then you're gonna sit there and think this wasn't worth it.
Okay, Mr. Brafman, let's go through the closing when I want to wrap it up a little bit. Menachem will go first, and Mr. Brafman will give you a few minutes just after 2 hours of this schmooze to think of to leave somebody with inspiration. But first of all, great for Mr. Ben Brafman coming on tonight, late at night on Sunday night, giving us 2 hours of his time. And it's a tremendous chizuk for a lot of people. And listen, Mr. Brafman, whether tonight or future people listen to this, and one person, gets out of trouble or doesn't do the wrong thing, just for that alone, it's a big chizuk for you. And that's really the intent of the program, to help people and to really, give them a little bit of a awakening in the real world and to realize what people are doing. Again, if anybody's here the first time, every Sunday night at 9:30 on the Zoom ID, we do different shiurim, different topics, different rabbanim. We're doing this for a long time, and we're going to have a special program tomorrow night, Monday night. Please join us with world famous Manis Friedman. He's very into now what's going on in Israel, and he really wants to talk a lot about the topic is, why did Hashem let this happen? What's our role in a time of crisis? And exploring world events and the biblical prophecy of Gog and Magog. That's going to be out tomorrow night. Menachem, we got to sleep. We got to get ready for tomorrow. And Menachem, the following Sunday, next week, the regular program is going to be with Rabbi David Sutton. He wrote the Beis Halevi in English. It's the best-selling sefer in art school, actually. And he's going to be talking about exploring B'tachon through the wisdom of the Beis Halevi. So please join us. We're going to work on being on our B'tachon. We're going to learn a sefer together with him. So please join us. It's going to be very powerful. Everything is recorded. But will be on menachembernfeld.com. If anybody has any questions, please email coachmenachem@gmail.com. And we could forward it to Mr. Brafman as well. We'll fill up his email box. We'll respond to every email. It's $5,000 an email. I'm just joking. But if anybody has any questions, just email Coach Menachem. And again, tonight's share is share 161. If anybody wants to listen on the phone number is 848-777-GROW. That's 848-777-4769. Again, thank you to all the advertising sponsors, Lakewood Scoop, Elliot and Ariel from 5 Town Central, Chayla Kaufman from JCM, from the Jewish Content Network. And I'm just going to go to give a closing to Menachem, and I'll leave it off with Mr. Brafman. Just the awareness that we hundreds of people coming, thousands of people will listen to this program. I feel it's just so important to deal with topics. I mean, personally, I keep on hearing different stories in the past year or two that are going on, and it just people, especially younger people, they get very excited, they get very money hungry, and they lose. I don't know whether on purpose, not on purpose. They they don't have their mindset straight. So really, just try to listen to this and take in all the words of Mr. Brafman. Again, everything we've spoken tonight is very general. It's not specific. It's hard. Every case is specific, and there's a lot of details that go into it. But the point is, when you do things, you have to realize there are consequences, and you have to be careful. And it's usually not worth it at the end of the day. So if you're going to make money, we believe in Hashem. Plenty for Mr. Brafman. Do you know a lot of people that make money honestly and just do everything right? Is there such a concept?
Yeah, I do.
Oh,
I do.
Interesting. Okay, I just want to make sure that exists.
The majority of people.
Majority. Okay, so that's my closing. I'm going to give it to Coach Menachem and then Mr. Brafman. Leave the oilam with, wrap it up and leave the oilam with some chizuk for the end.
Yeah, I want to thank you. Thank you very much for coming on. And like we heard, living like a Torah Jew, trying to do the right thing. And again, the awareness is important because not everyone knows, but after listening to this and opening up your eyes and doing things with Yeshiva Das, hopefully we'll be able to live, like the majority do and make the money that you need to. Hashem should help. We shouldn't know Ben Brafman only from simchas and from good things, and Hashem should give you koyach to continue. Thank you very much, and I'm sure you're doing a lot for Klal Yisrael, and you should continue amidst Hashem. So thank you for that.
Ben, the floor is yours.
All right, I appreciate the invitation. When I when I thought about should I come on, should I not come on, I'll tell you that I had mixed feelings because at the end of the day, sometimes you come on a program like this and someone's pushes in a question that you're not careful how you answer, and then suddenly they run with your advice, and and then suddenly you're a bad guy because you gave them advice and they ended up going to jail. So I was very careful tonight not to give specific advice to specific questions, and I want to hope that whoever is listening to this program just recognizes that this topic is a general discussion. Excuse me. It's very hard to answer these questions, and I hope I tried to help people who have concerns, and whether they're potential victims or potential ganefs, that I gave them pause on either end of this crazy world we live in. And I really want to finish off topic again, because I think as hard as it is to have this discussion on a normal day, it's very hard to have it given what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, and given what's going on in our personal lives and in our collective lives as Am Yisrael. And I think you have to be a Jew today to really feel the tension in the world that we live in, and if our kids who live there, and our children and grandchildren. So it's not easy at this time. There used to be a song that they sang in Camp Agudo when I was a little boy, which was "Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid." Oh, it's hard to be a Jew. In particular, today, it's very hard, and it's very hard. Not because we've done anything wrong, but because at the end of the day, what's happening to our people is not just in Eretz Yisrael, although there it's in particular bad, but here, Jews are being assaulted on the street. They wear a yarmulke if they have their sisters out, and it's a terrible time where Jews are just being randomly blamed for what Hamas did to start this crazy time period in our life. And those of us who are not children any longer, and who are not kids anymore, I think it was hard for me to recognize whether or not I would ever believe that in my lifetime I would see a time like this. And I never thought I would, to be honest with you. And now we're living through it, and we're living through it not because anybody asked for this, but Hashem has His own mysterious ways, and one day we'll figure out why this happened. But I think personally that it can't end like this. I think it has to end with Israel being victorious, and I think it has to end with Hamas being completely destroyed. And I think that if that happens, and if it happens sooner rather than later, I think at the end of the day, we will, again, make it back into the eyes of the world as humane, religious, religious people who are not brutalizing civilians because it's easy to do. I mean, it breaks my heart to see some of these pictures, not just what happened in Gaza for the Jews, but also to see these Palestinian kids, and it breaks your heart if you're a normal person. But I also think if you're a normal person, you realize that Israel is not at fault. The Hamas is really using these people and has used these people. And my only hope that the geniuses who are in our really top schools in the United States could get it through their heads that as I think our president said, Hamas is evil and Israel is good, and Israel has always been good. But at the end of the day, it's very easy to say that. It's very hard to convince the world right now. So my hope is that this matzav ends with a lot of more bloodshed by by the Eretz Yisrael and by the Jewish community. And I really hope that the Chayalim who are on the front lines all have Hashem watching over them, and they should be Matzliach. That's all I really.
Amen.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Brafman. So again, everybody, see you same time tomorrow night with Rabbi Manas Friedman, and next Sunday with Rabbi David Sutton. And again, thank you, Mr. Brafman, for coming on. And we need Mashiach now. That's the bottom line.
Amen.
Good night.